Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar. My name is Paul Kirkwood and I'm the Head of Learner Experience at ACCA. I'm going to introduce our session today as well as our expert presenter, Barry Walsh. Barry is the Professional Education Content Lead at ACCA. Now, this session is designed to help students who are planning to take the Accountant in Business ACCA exam. It's designed to build your confidence by providing both technical and exam technique guidance. And we're going to do this by debriefing exam standard questions. And now, let's make a start. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Barry Walsh, who's our Professional Education Content Lead at ACCA. And Barry, I'll leave it to you to introduce yourself a little bit more fully and the session in more detail.
Thanks very much, Paul. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our Accountant in Business session today. As Paul explained, the purpose of the session is to help you prepare for the Accountant in Business exam. I hope to do this in two main ways. First of all, I want you to take from this session that the main key to exam success in Accountant in Business is simply to put the study hours required in that enables you to study the whole syllabus and gain the knowledge required to do well in the exam. Secondly, I hope to demonstrate how you can understand how to approach the exam as a whole, so some exam technique, and how to approach individual questions within the exam in a manner that will give you the best chance of using the knowledge you have to maximise your marks in the Accountant in Business exam. We've already had a brief introduction from Paul and an introduction given by me to myself. Okay, what we will go through briefly, we will talk about exam confidence, we will debrief some questions. That's questions both in section A of the exam and in section B of the exam. And that will be the main part of our session. Then briefly, we will look at some study resources, particularly signposting the resources that are available to you to help you achieve well in Accountant in Business. And finally, we'll finish off the session with some questions. Okay, very quickly, just a little bit about me and my background. I'm actually a CIMA qualified accountant, so qualified with a different accounting body many years ago, and I've worked in industry. I've worked a little bit in accounting practice, but most of my career I've spent in professional education, and I joined ACCA relatively recently as Professional Education Content Lead. A question to start with. So the first question we would like to ask is how you are planning to study, and specifically, are you planning to study with a learning provider? So that question is on screen now. I'd be very happy if you could actually respond on one of those three responses and click the submit button. And if we have a look at the results, okay, well that's very, very pleasing. So over 70% of you do plan to study with a learning provider. Some about 15–16% are considering it, and there's around about 10% who aren't planning to study with a learning provider. Well, then why did we ask that question? Experience and results of past students tells us that how students study does have a significant impact on your exam result. And students who do study with learning providers tend, as a group, to have a higher pass rate. Now, that doesn't mean that you cannot be successful if you are studying in a different way, and I do understand that sometimes it is not feasible to study with a learning provider. So, yeah, the main message to take away, if you can study with a learning provider, please do so. If you can't, please don't be despondent. You can pass this exam another way. But I would say, as a minimum, my advice would be to use study material from ACCA's approved content providers, Kaplan or BPP. That way, you can be sure that you have at least got access to the knowledge that you need to do well in this exam. Just one more question before we get into the main body of the session. How confident do you feel at the moment of passing Accountant in Business? Again, there's three responses there on screen. If you could enter your response and click the submit button. Okay, let's have a look at the results. Interesting. Well, very pleasing to see that none of you have said that you don't think you will pass, so you're not at all confident, and I think that is realistic and pleasing. Okay, we've got 50% saying they are very sure, and we've got 50% saying that we are reasonably sure. If you answered very sure, I would say you've got every right to be sure and every right to be confident. This exam has a high pass rate, round about 80%. However, don't be complacent, because even though the exam has a high pass rate, a relatively high proportion of students pass with a score of between 50 and 55. So the pass rate is high, but that does not mean that people are scoring very high marks in this exam across the board. So yes, be confident, but also make sure you do put the time in, you do put the study hours in that is required to obtain the knowledge to help you pass accountant in business. As I've said, this exam has a good pass rate, 80%, and we would class that as a very passable exam. Why do we think it's passable? Simply because the data tells us it's passable. However, even though the pass mark is 50%, so that means you can, if we want to look at it in whether you call it positive or negative, you can get 50% of the questions incorrect and still pass the exam. So you do not need to be, perfect. Now, I would be aiming for higher than 50%, but I wouldn't be aiming for perfection. Because aiming for perfection can sometimes be counterproductive, particularly as you lead up to your exam. Perhaps you're attempting mock exams and you get a score maybe of, I would say a good score, 60%, 65%. Certainly don't rest then on your laurels, but don't be disappointed with a score of around 60 or 65. Don't expect not to get some questions incorrect. ACCA exams are challenging. They are passable but challenging. So it's not realistic to expect to get every single question correct. And that applies both in your mock exams as you're leading up to your exam and the real exam. So obviously always strive to improve your performance. Debrief your mock exams. Think perhaps, what was it? Was it exam technique? Was it knowledge? Was it a combination of both? What are my weaker syllabus areas? Focus your study then on those areas, aim to improve and move on. Do not be despondent and think, oh no, I got a question wrong. Everybody's going to get some questions wrong. Thinking about the syllabus areas in accountant and business and how students tend to perform on questions in those areas in the exam. Well, on screen now are some examples of topics tend to score well in and topics that candidates tend to score less well in. I'm not going to go through these in detail because I am keen to get into the body of the presentation and look at some questions in detail. But the main point to take from the slide, again, study the whole syllabus. And as the exam approaches, focus your efforts on the topics that you find most challenging and aim to turn your weaker topics into your stronger topics. If you repeat that cycle, your overall mark will improve. A quick mention of exam technique and specifically time planning in the exam. Now, generally, most candidates, and I say most, not all, but most, do not find the accountant in business exam time pressured. Most candidates that we speak to after the exam say that they finished the exam comfortably within the time allowed. However, that does not mean that some candidates don't run out of time or some candidates end up rushing. So our advice would be ensure that you complete the 46 questions in Section A within 90 minutes, giving 30 minutes for your Section B questions. Now, that is a maximum amount of time for Section A. It may be that you complete those questions more quickly. But always keep an eye on the clock. Make sure you're not spending too long on any one question or any set of questions. Sometimes the amount of time you spend on questions is linked to knowledge. In fact, I'd say almost always is linked to knowledge. If you have the knowledge required to answer a question, you tend to answer that question more quickly. However, you shouldn't rush. But if you find there is a question you're finding challenging or some questions you're finding challenging, go through a process, which we will explain as we go through this session, but then there's no point wasting further time on it. At the end of the day, you've got to submit an answer, or you must submit an answer. You certainly wouldn't want to leave a question out, so don't spend too long on any one question. Focusing now on exam technique for individual questions. generally, when you are faced with a question for the first time, your initial level of confidence can be classified in three ways. You could have a high level of confidence, a medium level of confidence, or a low level of confidence. So if your confidence is high, you see the question and you think, great, I know this. I've got a very good idea about how to answer this question. Then slow down. Don't rush and make a silly mistake. Make sure you read the question carefully, read the responses carefully, select your answer, and move on. If you've got a medium level of confidence, so you've got some idea, you think, I've got some knowledge that is relevant to this question, but I'm not completely sure what the answer is. If you can, eliminate the options that you believe to be incorrect. That will leave a fewer number of options, and then make an informed choice based on the knowledge that you do have. If your confidence level is low, you think, I don't know this. Obviously don't panic, remain calm. I would say pause and think, okay, what do I know that could be relevant? And it may be that you just haven't made that connection that actually is required, and you do have some knowledge that is relevant. And once you make that connection, the question will become clearer. Even if you don't make that connection and you think, I don't even think I've covered this, or if I have, I've forgotten. Well, don't waste too much time on any question. As a last resort, have a guess. There's no negative marking. There's nothing to be lost by having a guess. Obviously, we don't want in a whole exam to be guessing too often, if that's the ideal. But at the end of the day, once you're in that exam room, you've got to answer the questions. So as a last resort, do have a guess. Okay, we're now going to move on to the question debriefs, starting with the Section A questions. So we've got a question on screen now, a typical Section A question. The question asks, which of the following is a purpose of internal control? And then we have four possible responses. I will read them. The top response is to provide reasonable assurance that the company can achieve its objectives. The second response, to ensure that all operational accounting data is totally accurate. Third, to eliminate all risks arising from fraud and other criminal acts. And the final option, to validate the financial statements of the company as a true and fair view. So I would read through the question and the options, and then I pause and I think, okay, what is this question asking? This question is about the purpose of internal control. Now, with that in mind, let's look at the options. The first option, to provide reasonable assurance that the company can achieve its objectives. I would say, yes, that is a viable answer. It's a possibility, as that statement does reflect the wide remit of internal control. So I would leave that as a possibility. I would then go on and look at the second option, to ensure that all operational accounting data is totally accurate. Thinking about that one, I would say internal control has a wider focus than operational accounting data, and it is debatable that any system can provide totally accurate data. So I would be discounting the second option. The third option, again, the problem with this option is that internal control has a wider focus. So the third option's focused on fraud and criminal acts. And also, it is unrealistic to eliminate all risks. So again, I would, just as with the second option, I would eliminate the third option. Then the final option down the bottom, to validate the financial statements of the company as a true and fair view. Well, as you're reading that statement, that should resonate more with an external audit function or purpose rather than a function or purpose of internal control. So after we've been through all four options, the only viable option is the first option, and that is the correct answer. Next question. We've got a short scenario at the top, again typical of a Section A question. Pfizer is the finance director of ABCCO and a non-executive director of DEFCO. She serves on 3 standing committees. These are the Remuneration Committee of ABCCO, the Remuneration Committee of DEFCO, and the Risk Committee of DEFCO. And then we get to the requirement. What are we asked to decide upon, to submit our answer based on? And the question is, which of the following statements is correct in relation to recognised best practice in corporate governance. So once we've read through that, and I haven't even read through the options yet, but I'm thinking, okay, what's this question about? We've got a scenario which is a little bit involved. We need to be clear about what we've been told. So, the key information we've got there, Pfizer is the finance director of ABCco. So the finance director is an executive director as opposed to a non-executive director. And then we are given other information that Pfizer is a non-executive director of a different company, and she's all on the remuneration committee of the same company that she's a finance director of, and she's on the remuneration committee of the other company and the risk committee of the other company. So it's very clear, it's very important that we are clear in our mind what information we've been given. And it's highly likely that as we go through the options, we will have to refer back to this information to make sure we are thinking in line with the information that we've been given. What are we asked? We are asked which of the following statements is correct. It's important to note the word correct. So we're looking for the one that is true in relation to recognised best practice in corporate governance. So we want something that is correct in line with best practice. Statement 1, Pfizer should not be a member of the risk committee of DEFCO as she is a non-executive director and will know nothing about operational risks. So we've got to think about that. And I would say that there's no issue with a non-executive director being on a risk committee. So that statement is incorrect. The second option, Pfizer should not be a non-executive director of DEFCO as she is the finance director of ABCco. Again, we need to think about what that statement is saying, and the conclusion I would reach is that there is no issue with an executive director of one company being an executive director of another company. So that statement is incorrect, because the statement is worded saying that Pfizer should not be. The third option, Pfizer should not be a member of the ABCco Remuneration Committee. Now, straight away, I would then be thinking, how should a remuneration committee be made up? What should the members, what should the members be? And the remuneration committee should consist of independent non-executive directors. So there's an example, that's the knowledge that we need. We've reached the point where we need to have some knowledge to be able to answer this question correctly. So the third option, Pfizer should not be a member of the ABCco Remuneration Committee. That statement is correct because Pfizer is also the finance director at ABC. So therefore, she should not be on the Remuneration Committee. So we know now that that third statement is correct. Now we could, we're 100% sure we could answer now. I would always recommend still having a look at the other option, just in case we've made some major misinterpretation and we've made a mistake. So that the fourth option, Pfizer should not serve on more than one standing committee at DEFCO. Again, I would say this statement is incorrect as there is no issue with a non-executive director serving on more than one committee. So we've been through the options and we have identified the statement which is correct. Next question. Again, we've got a scenario at the top followed by a multiple choice question with 4 options. The scenario at the top. Again, we need to read through it. We need to read through it carefully. Harry is the head of recruitment and selection at MXM Company. One of his tasks is to select 3 area managers. At present, there are 12 trainee managers, all of whom were originally recruited in anticipation that they would be promoted to area manager jobs. Harry believes that 9 of these managers will apply for these positions. Harry's general manager insists that the selection process must be rigorous and must test not only the technical knowledge of the applicants, but also their presentation skills and their ability to negotiate. So we've been given quite a lot of information there. And then the question that we're asked is which of the following would be the most appropriate method of selection? So for this question, I would read through the scenario, which we have done. The key points I would take away from that are that there are 3 positions to fill from an expected 9 internal candidates. So we've got 3 positions from a group of 9, and we're dealing with internal applicants. That's, they are key pieces of knowledge that we've been given. The other key piece of information we've been given is that we need to test the technical knowledge and the presentation skills of the candidates. Now, which of these options would be the most appropriate method to accommodate what we've learned in the scenario? And we've got a proficiency test, a panel interview, work sampling, and an assessment centre. Now, to answer this question correctly requires knowledge of those 4 methods of selection, particularly the correct method. Now, if we've got knowledge of the correct method of selection, we will be able to answer that question based on our knowledge of that correct, of the appropriate method. So an assessment centre. When I see assessment centre, I do think of a group situation. It's suitable for assessing multiple people at one go, multiple candidates. Now, a panel interview, which is also amongst the options, the panel there is the interviewers, so the recruiters, the people making the decision, rather than the candidates. That's not to say a panel interview couldn't be held with more than one candidate, but the information we've been given in the scenario, when we look down the options and we see assessment centre, that fits very, very well. So that's the approach I would take to answering this question. We've got to look at the information we've been given, we look down the options, we use our knowledge of those options, and assessment centre, as long as we've got that knowledge, then sticks out as the correct answer. Next question, typical format again. Again, we've got another scenario at the top. Mo manages a team in which individuals with strong personalities often have heated disagreements, which can lead to open conflict and disruption of work processes. So as we're reading through, we've already been given a clue as to the syllabus area, the knowledge area that will be relevant to this question. We're talking about groups and how people interact. We're talking about conflict and possible disruption. We carry on with the scenario. Mo called the team together and explained to them that the outputs of the team should take priority and that every individual team member should try to put their personal feelings aside for the benefit of the company. He persuaded them that they would be better off by modifying their behaviour as the team's effort was more important in meeting the objectives of the organisation than the personal agendas of each person in it. So again, when we're reading through that, it's important that we try to pull out the main points of what we're being asked, what we're being given. And then what are we asked to do? Which of the following is Mo's approach to addressing conflict? So we've been given a description of a situation which involves conflict, and we've been given a description of the way Mo tends to deal with the conflict, and then we're asked to label Mo's approach. So to answer this question, we need knowledge of the 4 approaches given as options: integration, compromise, denial, and dominance. Again, I would be looking at the scenario and thinking, what is the key bits of information that they've given us? And I would be trying to match that to one of these items. So when I see integration, I'd need to draw on my knowledge, and my knowledge of integration would tell me that emphasis must be put on the task and individuals must accept the need to modify their views for the sake of achieving the task, and that the group effort is superior to individual effort. So when I put that definition or knowledge of integration against the scenario that's been described, I think it's a very good match. So integration is already looking like the correct response. Now, just very quickly, if I then think, okay, what were the other responses and could they be viable? Compromise. Compromise involves both sides making a concession to the other in a negotiation. So there's some talk of people compromising their behaviour, so we could make that connection, but I still believe integration is a far better match than compromise. Denial involves the person in charge or managing the conflict situation, not acknowledging the conflict, denying it really exists, hoping it'll go away. That's not the approach that Mo has taken, so we can discount denial. Dominance involves the use of power to impose a solution. Okay, Mo's provided guidance as to how people should behave and how that will help a solution be achieved and help the group achieve its aims better. I wouldn't describe it as dominance. He hasn't just come in and said, look, my way or the highway, this is what we must do. So I would also discount dominance. Integration is the best response, and that would be the answer that we give. Another question. As part of its commitment to corporate social responsibility, TTC Company has decided to pursue a policy of sustainability in relation to its purchasing policies in order to maximise the welfare of stakeholders. That's a shorter statement, more easily to digest and understand. And then the question, what does the term sustainability mean in this context? Whenever we see the word sustainability, think immediately of something being able to continue in the very, very long term, really forever. So to be truly sustainable, an activity should be able to continue for forever. It should never need to stop. Now, that brings in all sorts of implications for things like resources. So, things like fossil fuel resources, they are, by definition, one day, maybe hundreds of years down the line, they are going to run out. So by definition, use of fossil fuels is not sustainable. Okay, I digress slightly. But the key thing is the meaning of the word sustainability. And once we get that meaning into our heads, then when we look through the answers, I think the answer should become clear. So sustainability means something should be able to continue forever. First option, maintaining long-term relationships with suppliers. Okay, I'm almost going to argue against my definition now because that does meet the definition of sustainability. But let's look at the other part of the question. What does it mean in this context? So what is the context? We have to go back above to the information that we were given. And we're talking about a commitment to corporate social responsibility. And we're talking about sustainability in responsibility to maximising the welfare of stakeholders. Now, maintaining long-term relationships with suppliers, I would say, has limited relevance in that context. So that would be my doubt about the first option. The second option, ensuring that prices paid for raw materials enable the company to maintain appropriate margins. No real relevance to sustainability there. We're talking about prices for raw materials. The third option, minimising the prospect of depleting future supplies of natural resources. I think now we're hitting sustainability. We are now finding what we were looking for. So that looks like a very, very strong contender for the correct answer. The final option, eliminating any detrimental effects of procurement decisions on the physical environment. I think it's quite difficult to eliminate any detrimental effects of procurement on the physical environment, but we are talking, to be sustainable, we don't have to eliminate any detrimental effects. We have to look at the bigger picture and be able to continue on indefinitely. So the best option, which is definitely the third option, which fits, because we're talking about depleting future supplies of resources. Next, Section A question. Now, this one hasn't got a scenario. It's got a much lighter load of information to read and digest, which can often make a question simpler, or perhaps more accurately, the challenge is different. So the challenge isn't now in interpreting the information we've been given and trying to relate it to the answers or the possible answers correctly. This is a straight test of knowledge once we get to this diluted, laser-targeted question. So the question is, which of the following should be included within a corporate code of ethics? So what knowledge do we need to answer this question? We need knowledge of what is typically included in a corporate code of ethics. And if we have that knowledge, we should be able to answer this question relatively comfortably. So the first option, a detailed description of all the commercial objectives of the company. So we're talking about a corporate code of ethics. I think we possibly may refer briefly to what the aims and objectives of the company are at a very, very high level. We certainly wouldn't have a detailed description of all the commercial objectives of the company in there, so we can discount that option. The second option, the standards of behaviour expected of employees. So we're talking about a corporate code of ethics. I think how we, as a company, expect employees to behave, and particularly the standards of behaviour we expect, that would typically be included within a corporate code of ethics. So that is a very strong contender for the correct answer. But we will still look at the other options. The third option, a summary of the responsibilities of the individual directors of the company. No, not relevant to a corporate code of ethics. We may mention something about how the directors are involved in ensuring that the company operates ethically, but we would not require a summary of the responsibilities of individual directors. So we discount the third option. The fourth option, a list of the laws and regulations with which the company will comply. So on reading that, we may be thinking, okay, well, laws and regulations and complying with laws and regulations is part of behaving ethically. So that may appeal to us as a possible correct answer. We should remember, though, that behaving ethically often involves going further than the law requires. And actually, behaving with laws, obeying laws and regulations should be taken for granted. That doesn't need to be stated specifically within a corporate code of ethics. So the best answer, again, is option 2, the standards and of behaviour expected of employees. Another question. So we're going through these quite quickly, but I'm just doing it to demonstrate the different types of questions that come up and more the approach that we will take to answer them. The knowledge that we're covering here actually does tie back to the areas that, students find more difficult, or a higher proportion of students tend to find more difficult. But the main thing we're demonstrating is the approach to answering the questions. Next question. Which of the following describes a pluralist approach to ethical decision-making? To answer this, we need to know what a pluralist approach to ethical decision-making is. Now, if we don't know, the key word is pluralist, and just thinking about other words in the English language, plural means more than one. So, again, if we've got the knowledge, we can just go through the options. We can identify the option that resonates with the knowledge that we have. But if we don't have all of the knowledge, or we don't think we are 100% sure about what pluralist means, we could here take another approach to try and join the dots as to what may be a typical pluralist approach. So to do that, we've thought of a word, plural, which means more than one or multiple. So we've got that in mind as we go through these options. The first option, the decision taker will seek to satisfy some of the demands of all of those affected. So we're looking to satisfy some of the demands, but of all of those affected. So that phrase, of all those affected, so we're talking about all of those affected, that could resonate with pluralist to me, even if I didn't know what pluralist was. So definitely a contender for the correct answer. The second option, actions will be determined by the personal preference of the decision taker. That sounds like the decision taker just taking the decision unilaterally on their own, wouldn't resonate with a pluralist approach. The third option, decisions will be taken in order to satisfy all of the needs and desires of the majority of those affected. Okay, so that is a plausible answer. If we don't know what pluralist is exactly, and we've taken the approach I outlined earlier, thinking about plural, I think that is a plausible answer. It's whether then it is as good as the first option. Now, if we know the knowledge required, if we know what a pluralist approach is, we will know that actually the first option is the correct answer, but that requires us to have the knowledge. If we didn't have the knowledge, we were taking a little bit of an educated guess, we might be stuck between 1 and 3. Now, if we look at the fourth option, the decision will disregard all minority demands. I think I'd probably discount that even if I wasn't 100% sure of what pluralist is, because it sounds like it's trying to narrow the area of focus, where pluralist sounds like quite a wide area. So we're left between options 1 and 3, and we would need to know that a pluralist viewpoint is helpful in situations where a range of perspectives have to be understood in order to establish a course of action. With that knowledge, I would say the first option is the best option. Next question. Which of the following is an advantage of centralization? Apologies. Start again. Next question. Which of the following is an advantage of centralization in an organization with a dispersed network of offices? So again, just one sentence in the statement in the question. Before we look at the options, let's analyze what we're being asked. So we're talking about an advantage of centralization. So the knowledge that we need is knowing what a centralized organization is, how a centralized organization is organized. And this centralized organization has a dispersed network of offices. So what we're talking about is a centralized head office with a dispersed network of offices, centralized head office and other offices, smaller facilities, dispersed or spread out. That's the situation that we're talking about, and we're trying to identify an advantage of that arrangement. First option, decisions are easier to coordinate. So we're talking about a head office where most of the senior management are based together. So I would say that that would indicate a decision is easier to coordinate. That would be an advantage of this setup. The second option, greater speed of decision making nearer the point of sale. Now, the bit that basically discounts this option is nearer the point of sale, because we are saying we've got a centralized organization, so most decisions are going to be made by senior managers who are based at the center at head office. So we can discount that option. The third option, improved motivation of line managers. Now, line managers are often based in the dispersed network of offices, and a possible disadvantage of a centralized organization where decisions are taken at head office is that these line managers feel that their views aren't taken into account, which would be demotivating. So we can discount the third option. The fourth option, reduced workload for senior management. Well, if senior management are all based together at head office, and they are making most of the major decisions, we would not expect that arrangement to reduce their workload. We would expect their workload to reduce if decision-making was delegated across the organisation out to the dispersed offices. So the correct answer is the first option, decisions are easier to coordinate. Next question in Section A, and I believe it's our final Section A question. Data protection legislation should protect which of the following? So, to answer this question, we need to know about data protection legislation. What options are we given? We're asked whether data protection legislation should protect all individuals, living and dead, or whether data protection legislation should protect all living individuals and private incorporated businesses. The third option, data protection legislation should protect all individuals, living and dead, and all businesses. And the final option is that data protection legislation should protect all living individuals. We spoke earlier about using knowledge that we have to eliminate any options that we know to be incorrect. If we know that data protection focuses on the protection of individuals, we can eliminate options 2 and 3. We are then left with 2 options, the top option, all individuals, living and dead, and the bottom option, all living individuals. The difference between those 2 options requires us to know whether data protection legislation applies to individuals who have died. The answer is that it doesn't, so the correct answer is all living individuals. Moving on to consider Section B. This slide shows us examples of topics that students tend to score well in and topics that students tend to score less well in within Section B. Now, the common feedback that we've received from individuals who don't pass accountant and business first time is that questions came up on their weaker areas of the syllabus, whether that be in Section A or in Section B. So remember, follow the advice we gave earlier. When you're studying in the lead up to your exam, try and identify which topic areas you are scoring less well in. We call those your weaker areas. Focus your study on those areas. Try to turn those into stronger areas. We have now got a Section B question on screen. So these are multitask questions that appear in Section B of the exam. We've got some background. So this question has very limited background. The background we are given is that Mark and Abdul work as auditors at ABC, which is a limited liability manufacturing company. Mark is the company's external auditor and Abdul is an internal auditor. Okay, then we can see the task on screen. And we've been given a drop-down box and 2 statements. And for each of the drop-down boxes, we have to select the correct answer. So task 1, we have to identify the person who is appointed by the shareholders and is not an employee of ABC company. So if the person's appointed by the shareholders and is not an employee, that's going to be the external auditor, which is Mark. The second statement, this person works towards objectives set by the management of ABC company. Okay, so the person works towards objectives set by management. That is going to be the internal auditor, which is Abdul. So a very, I would say, simple, relatively straightforward question there for task 1. Moving on to task 2, based on the same background information. Task 2 is larger, so on screen now we can see we've been given a statement. Would each of the following tasks be the responsibility of Mark or Abdul, or both of them, or neither of them? So we've been given a list of tasks, and then we have 4 columns with each one with a possible answer in. So we need to remember that Mark is the company's external auditor and Abdul is the company's internal auditor. And that remains on screen visible with the background. Now that is key as we go through these line by line to ensure that we select the correct response. Starting at the top, performing a one-off investigation into suspected fraud. Well, a one-off investigation for suspected fraud, that would typically be done by the internal auditor, which is Abdul. Second line, reporting whether or not financial statements are prepared in accordance with company law. Well, as we read financial statements and company law, we should be thinking straight away external audit, which is Mark. The next statement, reporting to management on the effectiveness of internal controls. Even the word internal is included there, which is a bit of a clue. We're talking about the role of the internal auditor, which is Abdul. Fourth statement, expressing an opinion as to whether or not the financial statements present a true and fair view. Financial statements, true and fair view, if we've got the knowledge straight away, we're thinking external, which is Mark. Next, reviewing the implementation of corporate objectives. So that's quite a wide responsibility, but we're talking about corporate objectives. That's going to be somebody internal, which is, in this case, Abdul. And the final one, reviewing the effectiveness of the production department. Again, it's an internal focus. It's quite a narrow task, something that we wouldn't really expect the external auditor to get involved in. So it is the internal auditor, which is Abdul. So we've now provided a response for each of the tasks. We've completed that task 2. Interesting to note, if we look down the 4 columns, we've got Mark, Abdul, both, neither. We've only got answers in 2 columns, Mark and Abdul. But we are confident in our knowledge. So don't doubt yourself. Don't think, for goodness sake, there must be a response that belongs in one of the other columns, either both of them or neither of them. Trust your knowledge. Answer in line with your knowledge. Don't look for patterns. Don't look to think, that option was provided, therefore it must be used. Don't overthink it. Apply your knowledge, answer the question, move on. Next, section B question. We're given some background. The background states, selecting the correct communication method is important to ensure that the communication objective is achieved. Examples of different types of communication methods include conferences, face-to-face meetings, reports, and notice boards. Now, those methods that we've just been given, the 4 communication methods, they each are headings of 4 columns, and then we are asked to select the best form of communication method for each of the following objectives. Now, the first objective is that we wish this communication to reach a large audience over a wide area. Looking at the options, I would say a face-to-face meeting is unlikely. Generally, that terminology is used to describe a relatively small meeting, and we're talking about a large audience. Now, a report could be distributed. There's no restriction on how far a report can be sent or how wide an area. We can send it to as many recipients as we like, but we're talking about an audience. So, report's a possibility, but I'm still favouring conference for this one. And notice board, well, that will not reach over a wide area because we're talking about a physical notice board rather than some sort of electronic notice board. So therefore, I think we're talking about either conference or report. And I wouldn't answer until I perhaps had a look down at the other options. But if I'm looking down at the other options and I'm seeing explain complex facts and arguments, I'm thinking, okay, is that going to be a conference or report? So I'm looking for other options that would fit. And I'm thinking, right, I'll probably use report for the last one. So this one I will have as conference. The next option, transmit information cheaply to a large number of people in a physical location. The key item here is the same physical location. And the only option that really is referring specifically to a physical location is the notice board. So that would be the notice board. The next option, we want to generate new ideas. So how do we generate new ideas? Generally, we get people in the same room. Face-to-face meeting is the next option, is the correct response for that option. And that leaves explaining complex facts and arguments to a report. Complex facts and arguments are usually best communicated using written communication. So that provides a form of reference and people can go back and revisit complex ideas. So there we are. That's all the questions that we wish to go through. Now, we went through those relatively quickly. As I've said, that was the purpose was to try and show you the methodology rather than covering any actual syllabus knowledge, technical knowledge. You can do that yourself, either in class or through going through the approved study material, such as the textbook, practice and revision kit. Next. Okay, what we're going to talk about now very quickly are the resources that are available to you. Now on ACCA Global, the ACCA Global website, for accountant in business, which is part of the main ACCA qualification. So if you go into the study resources area, if you then select the main ACCA qualification tile, you can access the resources for accountant in business via that tile. You will go in, you will see the list of exams, and you can select the accountant in business exam. You can also go through the foundation level tile, where you will then see accountant in business listed as FAB, Foundation of Accountants in Business. Again, you can go in there to access the same resources. Once you get in, regardless of the route that you take, you will see resources that are available to you. Now, these are very useful resources. I do encourage you all to go in, have a look, particularly under things like the examining team guidance, where they give you, the methodology, the sort of logic behind why certain things are included in the syllabus, which can help you understand why things are asked in a certain way. Other resources available, we've got under learning and revision, we've got practice tests, specimen exams, and technical articles. Always worth visiting these. They often provide some very useful knowledge that can supplement whatever else you're using, such as your study text or your classroom notes. Please do make use of these resources. They are free and they are very useful in helping you achieve success in accountant and business. I would also encourage you to use approved study content from either BPP or Kaplan. So a study text includes all the knowledge that you need to pass this exam. Now, it can be daunting when you see a study text because accountant and business is a very large syllabus. Therefore, the study texts are very large, but they do include all of the knowledge that you need to pass the exam. Now, sometimes you may need to apply the knowledge, just as we've demonstrated in the questions that we've attempted, but it definitely is worth having one of these texts as a reference point. Now, we don't like to encourage shortcuts, but I do understand sometimes time is tight, and particularly as you're running up to your exam, I would encourage you to use either what BPP call pass cards and what Kaplan called revision cards, and these are highly summarized notes that provide the knowledge you need in a much more condensed form, summarized form. But most people find they probably need the detail in the study text. Or you can start by looking at the pass cards, the condensed version, thinking, actually, I need a little bit more detail to understand that. You can then go to your study text. Specimen exams, again, they were available through the website, the pages that we visited earlier. These are definitely worth doing. They can provide exam practice, additional practice, and also give you experience of the real exam environment. Now, there's nothing complicated about the real computer-based exam environment, but obviously you want to be familiar with it before you go in and face it on the day. So you go in confident that you know how the exam environment works. You can flick forwards and backwards if you need to. You know the different types of buttons and responses that you're going to see. So definitely make sure you're familiar with the computer-based environment before you sit your real exam. In addition to those specimen exams, there's something called practice tests, which are also mock exams. Now, these are charged for, so go on to the web page, have a look at the pricing, maybe different depending upon where you live, different currencies. Now, these practice tests are very, very useful, particularly as you approach your exam. The reason I say they are very useful is after you finish the test, you get a breakdown of your performance by syllabus area. And this is where you can identify your weaker areas. You can focus on those areas, bring those areas up. That is the key to scoring a higher mark overall than you would have done otherwise. Repeat that exercise, so do another practice test, look at the feedback from that practice test, again, focus on your weaker areas. So definitely worth doing the practice tests. Also, it means, these should give you a relatively, and I say relatively because there's always some discrepancy, accurate indication of where you are, of what you should expect approximately to score in the real thing. Okay, we're getting close to the end. Let me just have a quick look at some questions that have come in. Okay, first question. It's a bit long, I'll read it out. I've read some chapters once and then attempted the questions in the exam kit. So they've read the chapters once, the students read the chapters, attempted questions in the exam kit. They're getting the questions right, over 90% accuracy in the kit, and they feel they don't need to go back over those chapters again. Is my overconfidence taking over, and should I reconsider? I think it's good that you're pointing out yourself that maybe the fact that you're getting 90% in questions over and over again perhaps isn't a true reflection of your knowledge of that area. Now, it doesn't mean that you aren't very proficient in that area, but you're obviously seeing the same questions over and over again. So if you saw new questions on the same topics, that would be and provide a better indication of your current competence level of those topics. That's where mock exams, practice tests, other practice products can come in handy. So, yeah, I know it's difficult because everybody's got financial constraints and we don't want to be spending too much money. I understand that. But yeah, if you're doing the same questions over and over again, I'm afraid your familiarity takes over and it doesn't become a true test of your knowledge. Another question, can we return to any question? I presume that means in the exam. Yes, you can. You can flick back and forwards between questions. I believe once you finish section A, you are then on section B. So yes, you can. I wouldn't recommend doing that too much. My advice would be, as you're going through, follow the approach that we've just outlined, and rather than flagging a question to come back to it, I would make a response then. Now, if later you decide to go back, that's fine. But you can, to change your answer. But I don't see a lot to be gained by leaving things to one side. I think it can help. Sometimes it can hinder rather than help because it clutters up your mind. It's something you've got to go back to. If you sort of don't have that knowledge, are you going to do any better when you revisit it? So partly personal preference. Yes, you can, but I wouldn't recommend flicking back too much. What could I do before I attempt the paper? So I'm interpreting that as, what should I do as I build up? I would say mock exams. Attempt mock exams, whether that's out of a practice and revision kit, even on paper, as long as you are familiar with the exam environment and you've done some specimen exams within the exam environment. Mock exams, 2-time, and identify the areas that you need to focus your study on. As I said, ideally the specimen exams, that gives you that feedback in graphical form, showing where your weaker areas are. Mock exams as you get closer to the exam. But if you do find the mock exam exposes gaps in your knowledge, do revisit the areas, ideally in the textbook. How do I succeed well in the accountant and business exam? You get the knowledge. First of all, you get the knowledge. So you put the study hours in, whether that's through a study text or attending a face-to-face course. You get the knowledge, and then question practice, which teaches you how to apply the knowledge. You repeat that cycle. You identify weaker areas. You go again. Yeah, and your score keeps going up and up and up the closer you get to the exam. Now, I think we're getting very close to the end. So that's all I've got time for, I'm afraid. So thank you very much for your attendance today. I've enjoyed presenting. I hope you've got something out of it, and I'll hand back to Paul.
Thanks, Barry. Much as I hate to break things up, that really is all we have got time for. Thank you so much, Barry, for your support today, and to you at home and wherever you are for your participation. A very goodbye.